This is the July 11th, 2023 meeting of the working session of the Planning Commission. So we'll call the meeting to order. First up, we have time for public comment. This is an opportunity to address the Planning Commission, and you can use the raise hand button joining via Zoom, or you can press *9 if you've called in to indicate a desire to address us. You'll be identified by your name or the last 3 digits of your phone number when it's your turn to speak. For Zoom, did I cover all of it? Sorry, I don't have my script actually.
You can, for those that have called in, press *9 to digitally raise your hand. If you're just logged in via Zoom, you can just use the raise hand feature. I'll call on you. We do ask that you state your name, address, and we will limit your comments to 3 minutes. I will give a 30-second audible cue that your time is wrapping up.
So maybe I don't see any hands raised at the moment, but we could pause and give a minute.
Oh, there we go. John Majewski, you have 3 minutes to address the Planning Commission.
Hi, everybody. Hey, I just wanted to say that, I really appreciate the effort everybody's putting into trying to work on this, since for those of you that know me, we're an architectural firm and we're probably the ones that will be trying to implement whatever you come up with. So I just really want to request that, you do something that keeps it very clean and simple and achieves whatever your objective is as a, planning commission or as a city. I mean, we in concept support all the different efforts and everything that everybody has always tried to go through, whether it's affordable housing or sustainability. I think they're all extremely important, but I think the best thing that from our perspective would be if it can be relatively simple and black and white how to achieve it. I think that can go a long way to help you. If it's affordable housing, I think our best example is something that might be a little bit more, I think, harsh in a sense, would be an example of a project that we're doing in Berkeley, California, where the state stepped in and said, with SB 330, that they would allow 30% bonus on a building if you provided X number of affordable housing units, and they are truly affordable housing units. So that's kind of the farthest end of the extreme. But to be honest with you, it really does work well. And we were one of the first to do it in Berkeley, and we took a building from 17 stories to 25 stories. So it really did make a big difference. And I think it was really supported by the community because it was a transit-oriented site and it actually made sense to put the density there. And that's very much what I think you guys are facing. And just asking you to keep in mind whatever your goal is and keep it simple for us who try to implement it so that we can actually get it done for you. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you.
Adam Goodman, you have 3 minutes to address the Planning Commission.
Hi, Adam Goodman, 400 Virginia Avenue. I'm also, very happy to see that you're continuing to advance this topic, hopefully towards a positive resolution relatively soon. I think that looking at the most recent memo and the policy options, this does seem like either option would be an improvement. Either of the sort of options around either eliminating premiums entirely or keeping some premiums, but increasing base FAR and reducing the number of premiums. I think either of these could be a good step forward to some extent. I sort of have 2 points that I want to hit. One is, if we are going to keep an affordable housing premium, I think it's critical that we do allow 100% payment in lieu. I say this because the city is much more effective at deploying that money than private developers are. Jennifer Hall has recently talked about how any dollars that the city receives can be leveraged 5 to 10 times with other grants, other programs, et cetera. and make the money go that much further. And also, we've seen reports locally that some of the privately developed units, where it's like a few affordable units in an otherwise market rate building, they're having trouble filling those and finding the right people to live in those units. And again, I think the city the Ann Arbor Housing Commission already has much better processes to deal with finding qualified tenants and finding homes for them. So I saw that there's some concern about, that this could lead to concentration of wealth. Well, the city has a huge pipeline of proposals to build city-owned affordable housing at sites downtown, and what it desperately needs is the money to complete those projects. So I think that's critical. But also I want to say, I think Kirk Westfall, I saw there's a letter in your packet from him. I think he actually makes a really compelling argument that we should just get rid of premiums entirely, and instead rely on things like the existing affordable housing millage to provide the funds that I'm just said that we need. Net new development could significantly increase the amount of money that the city receives from that millage. So look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Leonard, are there any other?
No other speakers have indicated raise their hand.
Great, thank you. For those listening, and there will be another opportunity for public comment towards the end of our meeting. Okay, moving on to agenda item number 3, downtown premiums evaluation, stakeholder feedback, and preliminary amendment concepts. And I will turn it over to Megan. Hi.
Hello, how is everybody tonight? Great. Well, it's great to see you in this format. Much different than City Hall, but I think we can have a great discussion. And so again, as usual, I have a PowerPoint that's prepared, but I can turn it on and off as we get to discussion items and whatnot. So I'm going to share my screen. And just for the record, I'm Megan Masson-Minnock. I'm with Carlisle Wortman Associates, and we've been hired as consultants to assist with this process. And then, so our agenda for tonight is to go through our stakeholder consultation report back, and that should take about the first 10 minutes. And wanting to have a discussion on policy options and then amendment changes. And in your memo that was in your packet, we included an outline of recommendations for amendments. So any questions on the agenda?
Just one note on those amendment changes. Just a reminder to commissioners and anybody listening or watching, we're not making any decisions today. We're not going to ask you to take any votes, but we're going to prepare to you some preliminary thoughts or directions that we have about moving forward with this. And when we get to that end of that discussion, that's what we're really looking for, is help me as the planning manager craft the next phases of this to present to the full commission for consideration and deliberation.
Thanks, Brett. All right. And just to ground us all, just to remember where we're at, is that this is a map of the D1, and that is this color, and the D2 zoning districts, and the areas that are eligible for premiums. Those that are outside historic districts and outside of the floodplain are those marked in green. And you'll see that there's a white hatch over some of these sites, some marked in green, some that are not. And those are developments that have happened in the past 15 years. So basically everything in green under the current regulations would be what's eligible for premiums and a likely spot that would be developed.
Can I interrupt with a quick question?
Sure. No.
The hatch developed in the last 15 years. So does that include projects which have been approved but not yet constructed?
No.
So those are things which have been completed. Okay.
Completed.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. So part of our scope was to, you developed goals and assumptions. And then part of our process was then to go out to stakeholders and talk to them about what these different policy options, what their feelings were, what unintended consequences they thought would be. Would either of these options, and specifically talking about not having premiums at all or having a small menu, which one of these would implement your goals? What were the unintended consequences, et cetera? And the stakeholders we talked to, based on your and staff's recommendations, were local developers, civil engineers, and architects. And those were 7 separate interviews. We talked to a group of 3 different affordable housing developers, and those were together as a group. We talked to CDM, so Community Economic Development Association of Michigan, and they are a statewide association of folks who work in affordable housing and community development. We met with the Capital Improvements Committee of the DDA, the Energy Commission, the Renters Commission, and they were lovely to host us, as well as Brett attended, and it was lovely that the Housing and Human Services Advisory Board also weighed in. So those were everybody that we talked to. Any questions about those? And so here is a short summary of what we heard. And then, in our report, we went into a little more detail. In the report, we put feedback into 3 buckets. One was something that we heard in every group. Another group were what we called items of note, so that they were interesting ideas that related back to the task at hand, specifically what to do about premiums. And also in the appendix of our report, you'll see a number of items that were and suggestions that were also mentioned as well, that were beyond the scope, but we felt that, number one, anybody who shares feedback, we should give that to you as decision makers. And then 2 is that also that these were things to note as you go forward, because again, this is only one tool. And a zoning is a very specific tool, always more of a hammer than anything else, in terms of sometimes getting what you want. And you're also going into a comprehensive plan update. So that information there in the appendix would be likely useful then. But things that we heard from every group was, number one, there was pretty much across the board support for increasing the base FAR, whether that was just in not having premiums at all, and increasing the base FAR, or that hybrid model of increasing the base FAR and having a small menu. And the development community also stressed that the need for straightforward and easy to understand regulations in that. Members of the HASB and the DDA-CIA also stated that they felt that density in and of itself is a goal that creates sustainability. And that's something we've heard at different points along the process. But when asked across the board what the preference was most of the stakeholders we talked to had a preference for that small menu, be it the Renters Commission, the Energy Commission, the DDA, CIA, architects, nonprofit and for-profit developers. They preferred that as long as it's easy to understand and easy to implement. And probably what a member of the DDA CIC probably summed it up best, where they felt that the small menu option could achieve all of the goals, whereas if you did the no premiums option, that would not necessarily achieve the housing diversity or your attainability goals. Just increasing that pool wouldn't necessarily always get you to that item. When we were talking about the small menu, there were back and forth about housing versus sustainability. And I think as we get into this discussion later, a challenge for you is whether that housing versus sustainability is an either or conversation or a yes and situation. Because there was the Energy Commission felt that sustainability premium was the most critical to retain, while Renters Commission, DDA, CIA, and the development community, especially nonprofit developers, felt that housing development, the housing premium was the one should be maintained. Naturally, a lot of these might come from, you can construe as coming from self-interest, but for you as decision makers going forth, it's good to know that there is support for either option and to decide whether those two can be together or whether they need to be separated. And we'll get into our recommendations a bit later, but if you've gone through your packet, you know that we've leaned one way in that, looking at maybe that this is better as a yes and situation. With the housing affordability, when we started to talk about that in every single conversation, we got into the nitty gritty of it. Is it 60% AMI? Is it 80% AMI? Is it 80 to 100% AMI? Who, which one? Who benefits? How do we determine what that is? How is that implemented? And so, if that's part of the policy options going forward, that's going to have to be carefully discussed, but also carefully defined in your future regulations in terms of what housing affordability is, and how it's going to be implemented across the process. Because as you know, a lot of times these approval processes, they take months, if not sometime over a year. And statistics in terms of how a new annual AMI might come out. And so those were some of the feedbacks. That's some of the feedback that we heard, is that sometimes the housing affordability can be a moving target, but also a lot of concern from different, especially the appointed commissions, of what exactly is that AMI and who it is. And for a lot of people, being able to put a face or a name, so that's not just a number, is who's going to be, who's it benefiting, who is it serving. Another thing that came up in almost every group where somebody would point out is that financing is a factor. So the players in the room are not only the city and the developers, whether it's nonprofit or for-profit, it's those people who are also financing it. And if a project can't be financed, it's not going to be built. So sometimes some of those things for the financing come in, even though a regulation doesn't require it. Sometimes, such as parking, some developers mentioned that their financing wants them to have parking, even though the city doesn't require it, as an example. As a factor sometimes in that financing was a discussion of the 100% payment in lieu. And what we heard from the development community, so especially the for-profit development community, was a preference for that. And one of the factors was that in terms of when they do their finances and are talking to their financiers, that is a one-time cost if it's 100% in lieu. And it's calculated in a different way, other than if they have to carry those costs all the way through the project. When we talk to the focus group of nonprofit developers, two of the developers felt strongly that it should be the 100% in lieu option should still be there. One felt strongly that it should be there should be in-unit housing affordability still required. Across the board, all three of them agreed that if you can guarantee that all of these units would always go to people who qualified for them, they would be in favor of in-unit affordability requirements, but just hadn't seen that happen, and were leery that the situation would change in the future, despite everybody's best efforts. When we talked to the Renters Commission and the DDA Capital Improvements Committee, there were actually some reservations about allowing that 100% in lieu option. Some felt that it could lead to a lack of affordable units in the downtown, as well as some just didn't like it, like the option of the developers being able to, quote unquote, buy their way out of the affordable units. There was also, and it was mentioned before in the public comments, about the unintended consequence of wealth concentration, especially with allowing 100% in lieu or not having premiums at all. In that felt that then there would be affordable housing likely outside of the downtown, but not necessarily inside. And then that could be overcome by programming or by the Housing Commission having specific sites within the downtown. But that came up a number of times, and so we wanted to share that. Finally, when we asked about other incentives, those that were shared were financial incentives, such as a lower fee structure, maybe for smaller developers or smaller developments, clearer code requirements, consistent communication, streamlining of the development approval process, and more brownfield money. Nonprofit developers also suggested that time, speed, cost, and design requirements above what is required by code could be reduced. So if there could be exceptions to the rules for affordable housing, or if just the time and the detail could be compressed, they felt like that would be an incentive as well. So that was a lot. Does anybody have any questions about what I went over?
I would like to add just a thought for the commissioners to think as we consider simplicity and usability, some sort of sustainability premium, and some sort of separate affordable housing premium. This is something that we as a community have struggled with. I don't want to say struggle with. We have wrestled with this issue both at the outset and successful and non-successful evolutions of different aspects of our premiums. And I would, as we're sort of diving into that, I would just ask commissioners to be mindful. I honestly personally lie on the side of a sustainability or energy efficiency premium, full stop, and affordable housing premium, full stop. I think when we start to do the yes and, it can add to some of that muddiness or complication that we heard some feedback on. So not prescribing something, but that's something I think particularly to be mindful of as we proceed.
Oh, go ahead, Commissioner Hammerschmidt.
I just have a clarifying question from the memo. In the first section about increasing base FAR, and this could be me just being stupid today, I don't know. It said the feedback was to make premiums difficult to obtain to meet city's goals. And that felt kind of opposite to what we should do. So can you, you like
Right.
talk me through that?
Yeah, no, I can talk you through that. So we're looking to increase the base FAR, right? But then if you're gonna leave that incentive, make that incentive, that next bit, worthwhile. So that could be hard on the developer, but it is worthwhile to the city. So more
That
than,
makes more sense.
does that make more sense?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah.
I was wondering if you could recap again a little bit the conversation around the preference for the small menu. So, and sure that my understanding is correct. So that is a preference for retaining premiums over eliminating premiums and just increasing the FAR. If
Yes.
that's correct, I was surprised to hear you say that private developers prefer that over just increasing the FAR. And so maybe you could help me understand the conversation around that.
I think that they were being answering the question of whether it would achieve your goals. And I think a number of the developers that we talked to also sincerely want what some of the city's goals are and realize that they have some limitations in delivering that. So a lot of times the conversation was, yes, this increase the base FAR. Absolutely. That's a starting point. And then if you want to have a premium, so that bonus, we're all in. Keep that simple. And, by the way, that's going to achieve some of these goals that you can't require by code. So it's that in terms of delivering affordable housing, diversity of use of housing types, and delivering energy efficiency.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome. All right. So anything else on what we heard from on this list? So there were a couple of items of note when that came up that we thought that were relevant to come to this conversation. And again, these may not be things that will be part of the conversation going forward, but it may be. Number one, we got feedback that the development process is difficult, and we got that from for-profit developers, architects, civil engineers, and nonprofit developers. We heard a lot about moving targets, about process from communication, things like that. So I know the city is looking at these things in another project, but that was feedback that we got. And so in terms of premiums, what was articulated to us was keep it as simple as possible. There were some conflicts in what people felt about what should be going on with housing for families in the downtown. A member of the Renters Commission felt really strongly that families should be able to live downtown, because then you'll get people to stay longer through kind of all cycles. You just won't have singles or seniors or whatnot. But when talking to nonprofit developers, one of them had done a survey with families looking for affordable housing, and really parking was a big issue for them, and saying that they didn't want to live downtown unless parking was available. And so, as we're going through, and as you're talking about what the premiums are for, what goals you're going to meet, and things like that, just to know that there were differing opinions about families living downtown, and could all of the resources be provided, and was that really something that was attractive? Also, what came up a couple of times was extension of premiums, and by extension I mean geography. So some developers suggested that premiums could be allowed in the floodplain or in historic districts under limited circumstances. A member of the Energy Commission felt that premiums should be extended to student neighborhoods, so beyond the D1, the D2. I'll defer to Alexis and Brett and to you as to which zoning districts that would be. But there was some appetite for looking at covering a greater geography possibly with these. And that's something I know that, especially Planning Commission. Wishi, is that how I say your last name? I always seem to get it wrong.
No, it's really straightforward. It's White.
White?
Think YCH.
YCH. Thank you. White.
White.
I think you've brought that up before as well. Any questions on these? So in the memo from us, we presented some policy approaches, and they were in a matrix, but they really kind of boiled down to two choices. One was no premiums with increased FAR in the D1 and the D2 districts. There were a lot of pros to those in terms of increasing downtown development, the number of units, the potential for missing middle housing units, that increasing the tax base, because as we increase the tax base, we support the affordable housing millage, more money goes into that fund. It allows greater flexibility to the developer, including land uses, and the development's easier to finance. The cons were that there's a lack of incentives for items that can't be required like affordable housing, like some of the energy efficiency or the sustainability items. And the infrastructure impacts are there would be there due to larger buildings, the parking, utility capacity, and again, also that possible concentration of wealth downtown and segregation of housing types within the city. And then there's this hybrid model where the city would look to increase the FAR and offer premiums. And this was the menu of different types of premiums that came up. The first that's listed here is that you continue to incentivize residential. So straight residential. So, and that increases the number of residential units downtown, again, leverages that downtown development to help affordable housing throughout the city, provides the missing middle, increases the tax base. But this may not be as attractive to developers and may have a limited interest within the community. Just residential as in and of itself, that wasn't something we've heard really clearly from you or from stakeholders when we've talked to them. However, when we've talked to you and some of the stakeholders, there's been there's been support for affordable housing, whether it's in unit or payment in lieu. And that can, if you have it in unit, increases the affordable, that you're going to increase the affordable housing supply downtown. Some of the cons is may not be as attractive to developers. And if you've looked at the track record of the past couple of years, I think you'll see that was one of the things that seems to have bubbled up. It's hard to finance. It's hard to include in a pro forma. There's the challenge of the developer managing the units. And those resources may be more expertly handled by the Housing Commission or other affordable housing developers or managers. And also the land in the downtown is the most expensive to build housing, whether it's affordable or market rate. So having that payment in lieu as part of the affordable housing premium, that's easier to finance for developers. That again, those resources would go directly to people who know how to use them best, and also could be used more efficiently, not only in the downtown, but throughout the city. And one of the cons was that maybe it creates more residential units downtown, but that doesn't include the affordable units. You're not going to guarantee that with zoning. That's another action that the city is going to take. The standard and formula could be complicated to determine. And also something to keep in mind is that in lieu fee could be raised to a point where that bonus is no longer attractive. So you're still offering an incentive, but that incentive, because the price is so high, that's too high of a bar for it to be attractive to a developer or to their financiers. The other thing that is offered in that menu is to look at energy efficiency. Obviously, that would create more sustainable buildings downtown, and it advances the city's sustainability goals. But that standard and formula can be complicated to determine. As someone who was part of these conversations in the teens, I remember multiple discussions where we got very, very in-depth conversations about how do we make sure this happens? How do we make sure it happens over the life of the building? What's the repercussion if it doesn't, and whatnot? And then that can get, what can happen then is you no longer have simple language because you're looking at guaranteeing those things over the life of the building, and technologies change and whatnot. And again, that bonus may not offset the costs. So, did anybody have any questions or additions to those pros and cons that you wanted the rest of the Planning Commission to hear or share? All right. Hearing none. In our memo was offered an amendment, an outline of amendment changes. And as Brett said, the goal of tonight is for you to have a discussion on these in order to give guidance to staff about what amendment language to draft to move this forward. And so the outline that was proposed for discussion's sake was that looking at raising that base FAR and D1 and D2. And that's up for discussion, but a meaningful amount is recommended. Also to maintain that affordable housing premium, and the 100% in lieu seems to be the most attractive option when talking to for-profit developers and nonprofit and affordable housing developers. Also to look to maintain an energy efficiency or sustainability premium. The main thing on that is that it's got to be easy to understand and achievable. And you need to further define what that energy efficiency or sustainability goal is and so in order to have that link to the tool. Also in this is to, we suggested to eliminate the other premiums, the historic preservation premium, the pedestrian amenity premium, the public parking premiums no longer reflect the city's highest priorities. They did it at a time, but those are not the main priorities that they were in the early 2000s.
And rarely used.
And rarely used. Thank you. And then also, again, and I've said this, I feel like a broken record with this tonight, but again, I know that it's hard to do when drafting code is to simplify the language. And so that's something to keep in the back of your mind as we're having this discussion. So I'm going to stop this share. We can all see each other. And Vice Chair Abrams,
Yes.
do you want to lead it, or do you want to do a popcorn, or do you want me to lead it? How do you want to proceed?
I'm happy to lead it or just to moderate. Is there anybody that wants to kick off the discussion? Commissioner White?
Okay, thanks for the presentation, Megan, and the information and putting it in our packet. So I'll start with a question. Is there another place in code where we tax something that we want? Because the affordable housing payment in lieu winds up being an additional tax because we now have a affordable housing millage that the developer would pay. And I wonder so two things. One, is there some place in the planning code, so maybe this is a question for planning managers, where we tax something that we want? And then two, did your conversations with the stakeholders sort of expose this as a double tax? Because I'm really trying to process why we are effectively taxing something that we want.
And I mean, we do tax for things we want broadly, but I don't think that's what you mean. We tax for parks and recreation. We tax for streets. We tax for sustainability. We tax for transit. So we do tax for those things. But I think what you're talking about is doubling that. And no examples come to mind. The closest example I can think of is the voluntary parks contribution. We request that projects that are adding residential and population can make a contribution to the city to help sustain a sort of per capita equivalent park infrastructure for that increasing population. But I think it's important to delineate that as a voluntary. In that same lens, premiums are voluntary. Nobody has to take them. So I would say that's the only equivalent that I can think of.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, and I think for me, it is the double tax because we now have the affordable housing millage. So we didn't have the affordable housing millage when this change was implemented in 2016. I'm going to get the date wrong, like
19.
when 19, sorry, off by 3 years. So when that premium changed, we didn't have the millage. And so it would sort of make sense, sort of we need affordable housing. You're going to sort of build this in a premium area. It's going to be hard for us to get the kinds of housing that we want. So if you're going to build this, then we want you to pay into this when it exceeds the underlying zoning at a certain threshold or to unlock additional FAR. And when I first joined Planning Commission, I think one of my very first emails to you, Mr. Leonard, was, is it true that since we made this affordable, these premium changes, we haven't had any development or much development in the downtown? And I think, as I've learned is your response template, you hedged and then you answer to say, yeah, that's about right without giving too much away. So a chance for you to clarify if I misunderstood.
No, it's exactly right. Although I think I would just frame that as timing, in the context of COVID. I think I was hedging a bit at that time, whether or not it was a fair measurement of our premiums. I stood here before you unequivocally. I think now we have a fair measurement of our premiums in the context of other development. They're not working to achieve the goals.
Okay, so with all of that, I am perplexed why we are still considering the hybrid model and not just eliminating all the premiums and expanding the base FAR, especially given that the affordable housing comes out of the millage. So we're going to get affordable housing tax revenue from every development. The only thing that gave me pause was the caveat that you put in your memo to us that said there are concerns about the wealth concentration that will really likely occur. And then my response, and I'd love to hear from other commissioners or anyone, was we can address that through the city-owned land and using the funds from the affordable housing millage to build more affordable units that are permanently affordable and managed by the Housing Commission, as opposed to asking developers to put that in their development. Or the only other caveat I saw, one architect said something about a white box, which I thought was a novel idea to sort of address this. If we decided to put affordable units in, that they would be built as white boxes and then the Housing Commission would take ownership of them and somehow run them or finish them out or something. But am I thinking about this incorrectly? Is there something that I'm missing that is obvious? And so I'm just sort of interested in that part of the discussion.
Thank you. Commissioner Clark.
Thanks. Yeah, so I was just going to mention that I would encourage us to consider doing the 100% contribution, and that the concentrating of wealth is definitely a concern. I can see the argument that by having developers build affordable units in their building, you're getting more affordable units scattered throughout the city. But I do just want to kind of throw out there that those aren't necessarily the same type of what we would consider like affordable units. If the developers are doing the managing, there's limitations to kind of how it just won't be necessarily the same quality of affordable units that the city can provide. And by that I mean the city controlling access to those units and like the wait lists and everything means that there can be a certain like matching people to units, there can be eviction prevention, there can be supports in place, there can be things like that. A developer reserving those units, there can be things like, well, a student that technically makes underneath the amount, but maybe has assets or other income. I just think there's more room there for the intent of those affordable units, whether it'll be how well it will be executed. I don't know really how to eloquently phrase that, but I just think the city in general and affordable housing providers do a better job of providing affordable housing, managing wait lists, treating tenants, across a whole diverse background spectrum of incomes. They have more experience with that, and it's more efficiently spent, I would say, those funds, if we can leverage them with other dollars. And again, the white box idea was kind of that's an interesting one, but I lean on the side of saying, I question whether affordable housing premiums is the best way to get more affordable units, and if we might just be best off increasing the floor area ratio and trying to encourage people to just develop more housing and get more funds into the affordable housing village.
Thanks, Mr. Leonard.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to emphasize something that Commissioner Clark was just mentioning. So we currently have some units in private development, and I want to be clear that over the last couple of years, we have started linking the requirement that those units be linked to a wait list that the city's Office of Community and Economic Development maintains. So on one hand, when I heard that, I was like, well, we actually do have some of those things in place, but I don't think that's the lead. I think Commissioner Clark is right on the money, is that with that experience, I don't have all the details, but I know that we're getting better at it, but finding the right entry on that wait list for that unit can be quite challenging. That's one piece of it. A second piece of it is, with some of our early experience, we were just, because of that, we were going through many potential applicants to try to link them with one of the units. Like, I could be exaggerating, but I think at some point we were going through like 50 applications before we would find the right one for that unit, which just is a lot of collective bureaucracy towards the goal of trying to get somebody housed. And then the last piece of it is, I think when we do get those units housed, in addition to those providers that have the expertise and the experience to manage affordable units really successfully, when those units are managed, even with them by somebody who is really knowledgeable and experienced, when that's happening in the context at times of otherwise market rate development, we have to be honest that there could be potential conflicts there. Sometimes, particularly at the lower income spectrums of restricted units, the services that are necessary, we want to keep those people housed. And when there's a potential tension between them and maybe market rate elsewhere in the building, we want to minimize the pressure of displacement for that person because of some management aspect of that. So I just wanted to add, this is just sort of anecdotes that I've heard from providers, but I think it really echoed what Commissioner Clark was mentioning and some of our experience thus far.
Yeah, maybe just to build on that. I mean, there are also a number of affordable housing developments downtown that are being pursued by the city through the Affordable Housing Village and other public funds. So just in terms of thinking in a 10 or 15-year timeline, there will be a substantial number of affordable units in or very near the downtown. I wanted to maybe just return to the points that Commissioner White began the conversation by making, and kind of ask openly, I guess, any of you, whether we consider density to be, if we, I mean, this is what Commissioner White was saying, like, if density is something we want, because it both makes our overall housing stock in the city more affordable and is also by nature more sustainable, more energy efficient, why would we make it difficult for developers to achieve maximum density for the sites that they're developing in the downtown? So, and I guess maybe a related question to that would be, just to even start talking about numbers, because I think that's what would be helpful for me. If currently in the D1, the maximum FAR is 900%, that's with premiums. That signals to me that 900% is a density that we all, as a city, kind of decided we were comfortable with, we would have been happy with any of those parcels in green being developed to 900% FAR. So is that where people are thinking the baseline FAR is? And if you are somebody who supports premiums, that we would go above and beyond that? Like where are people in terms of the numbers? Because just to lay my cards on the table, I think I'm somebody who would begin in the camp of no premiums and no FAR limit, or a max, a really high FAR limit. But I kind of maybe want to temper that by hearing other people's rationales for imposing some kind of limit. And what do people see as the downside to the downtown accommodating whatever density developers think that they can finance and build, what that makes sense in terms of their pro forma, based on, more housing is good, and more housing actually pushes, produces more affordable housing in other parts of the city, and the new housing will be more sustainable than the existing housing stock because it's dense, because it's new construction built to energy and code standards. Commissioner Hammerschmidt.
So I guess I don't know how to answer your questions because I agree with you. I'm also sort of the camp, no premiums. The numbers, I don't know. I haven't fully, we can have a discussion about numbers. I could be persuaded to just unlimited. I think like the 900 maybe is a good starting point for discussion, since that is our current, but I don't know, to me, and I appreciate all of the interviewees and their feedback for the memo, Megan, that you created. I guess from my perspective, development is difficult enough. We're not getting what we want. So I think, and we have these, we've already talked about this, we have these millages for affordable housing, these millages for climate. And I think back to TC1 and, corridors, again, are places we said we wanted more concentrated development. We did not put any sort of sustainability or affordable housing incentives in place there. So why downtown? Or why not everywhere, to the point of that extension of premiums? So yeah, I guess like for me, I would like to eliminate them completely and just increase the base FAR to some number or unlimited. I'm sure there will be unintended consequences. There are of everything, but I don't know. I mean, I'd like to see more stuff happen. And I think Commissioner Abrams, like all of your points made sense to me.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just a potential unintended consequence of lifting the FAR and maybe go to 900% or you uncap it is, and I think I think Alexis especially can testify to this, is that you're going to get bigger buildings, and as they come, then there'll be pushback to that density, and then at some point a building will be built that people say is too tall or too big, and then what happens is that then you'll probably have a policy change again, but that density would achieve a lot of your goals. And so again, it's what you feel like are your priorities and what's going to implement it. So that's just based on experience and looking at your history, I can foresee that as an unintended consequence.
Thanks. Commissioner Clark.
I just want to throw out, because that could be an unintended consequence for sure. And I just want to throw out though that it could be also possible that with the extra, I guess, flexibility there, like and without the spending requirement, it might give some developers a little more room to maybe concentrate on design features to mitigate that size. And I don't know if we're interested in having any I don't know if there's any leverage available for us to do that, but the soft power there of, if you want to build this larger building, it might have to look a bit nicer or have a nicer facade to it. It might have to, appeal more to the public, and it might be an argument for accountability there, and the extra budget would be there to do so and have a little more innovation in design, and a little more freedom to avoid some value engineering that causes trade-offs.
Thanks. Commissioner Weich?
Alexis, I think we talked about this. So, is it true that the FAR came into our code after Tower Plaza was built in 69? Not to put you on the spot, sorry.
I couldn't find the mute. So that I am not 100% sure.
Okay.
I do know that there were no height limits downtown until
Prior to that.
until 2009 when A2D2, and that was sort of a long process. It was not a complete last minute addition, but it was toward the end of the process. Now,
Okay.
I'm not sure the behind. What I do
Sure.
know is that prior to like the 70s, when you were building on a platted lot, we didn't do site plans as we do them now. When you were building on a lot, we had zoning parameters and we had some requirements, say like parking and so forth, but that was just reviewed as part of a building permit, and that the site plan review as we know it now was for sort of brand new development. But what those zoning parameters were, I can't guarantee without a little research.
And in the TC1, our max height limit right now is 390, or is it?
It's a
over
flat. I think it's
400?
300, and whatever it is, it's a flat. I think it's 300.
But I thought you could get a bump if you
Oh,
did
yes.
affordable housing
Yes.
in the TC1, which would take you, it was like a 30% bump, I thought.
Right, we
And-
do offer now that it says any zoning district can get a 30% increase in height if you do an affordable housing, an affordable development or a sustainable development.
So that would get you almost to 390 then. So you're just shy of 400. And Tower
Yeah.
Plaza is like 270, 267.
Yes, I have a table of what it is, but it's not as tall as that, yeah.
And that is our tallest building in the downtown, right? Am I referring to the tallest building, or is there
Yeah,
a
it's-
taller building?
I believe that the tallest is 555 East William. That's Tower Plaza? That's not U Towers.
Oh, let me see.
I think
Yes,
Tower.
555 East William. I love that you know the address, but not the name of the building. You're so great.
Well, I get mixed up Tower Plaza and U Towers. Like,
It's okay. I just love that you're like, I don't know what it's called, but it's at 555 East William. So I think I agree with the other commissioners who share at Hammerschmidt and Commissioner Abrams around, I think 900's our sort of our floor. And then I wonder if our code already permits a 30% housing, affordable housing premium, does that give us everything that we need? Because we start at 900% and then you get another 30% across the code, you're saying, if you put in affordable housing. And then
you do get that, but the height limits in downtown are not 300%. The tallest one is 180.
Right. So.
And you correctly summarize it. It's a height increase, not an FAR increase.
Sorry, Alexis, did you just say there's a height limit in D1? There's not, right?
There is. The D1 district, the D1 district provides the floor area, the FAR,
Right.
and the permitted uses. And then the height and the setbacks are regulated by the character overlay district.
Got it.
And the tallest combination you can get is 180 feet. 150 feet is at least one combination. Most of D2 is 60 feet height limit. And developers are finding if you are using all the premiums and working your way up to 900%. And complying with our massing and articulation and offsets, you can't utilize all that FAR because
Right.
it's going to get cut off.
Gonna get too tall.
267 feet.
What is that number, Brett?
That's probably the height of Tower Plaza.
Our
Oh.
plaza, 555 East William,
The current max you're saying is 180.
267 feet.
Got it. But just to be clear for ourselves and anybody listening, in TC1 now, in theory, you could have a building that is 390 feet, as long as it was more than 1,000 feet from an R district.
That's the key.
But in our
yes,
downtown core, our densest part of the city, we have a maximum height of 180, half that, less than half that. Am I correct?
Yes,
Okay.
that is correct.
And in D2, oh, sorry.
Just
Go ahead.
remember that 30% applies to 180 too. So you get that same increase if you do affordable housing in the downtown as well.
Ah, okay. 180 times 1.3. Who's good at math? Not me.
Is it close to 50?
With a calculator.
Well, I guess 60 would be 1/3 of 180, right? 180 and 60, 240. Okay.
234.
234, yeah.
So it's still smaller than 555 Williams. So our effective height limit in the city of Ann Arbor is 267. We're not doing anything that's going to be taller than 555 Williams. Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's helpful.
Downtown.
Downtown.
Downtown, but on the transit corridor at State and Eisenhower. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions or I was just thinking maybe it's helpful to kind of get all the points on the table, you know? So one of them is just, I think we've heard some thoughts about getting rid of the premiums altogether. Maybe, does anybody want to offer additional thoughts or a counter to that? Or anything really, I guess. Yeah, Commissioner Lee.
Yeah, just postulating this thought regarding height. I worked on this paper back in school, back to my planning days, and it was on a correlation between height and community efficacy. So this idea of like high rises, right? I grew up personally in Korea where they're all like 30, 50 stories, right? Seoul is much denser. And so this correlation, you know, my first thing was, hey, when we moved to America, it's like we knew our neighbors, but in these high rises, I knew the person directly across the hall from me. And I just wanted to know, hey, I mean, I was obviously much, much younger then, but what variables are kind of salient to creating good community efficacy? And so for any type of developers, you know, that are listening out there, creating cohesive, you know, community groups is also very important. And so the only, you know, as we talk about greater height, the thing that we also have to do is be cognizant of public spaces, right? It's like mailboxes, it's elevator shafts. Where do people actually have like interactions, right? And so not the thing that I want to kind of add is in conjunction with that, while the design review board affords this, you know, opportunity to have design review, although it's, I don't think compliance is mandatory, but their advice is definitely listened to. I think that the importance of creating successful public spaces in context of higher rise buildings is very critical. So as we look to move towards this, obviously, you know, we talk a lot about how like transportation land use is inextricable. I also want to talk about public spaces, plazas, you know, as we talk about like plaza and some of these other spaces. How, you know, I'm really kind of going off of Commissioner Clark's statement. If they are building type 1A and they can go really high, then we want high quality buildings. So, you know, a part of me was just thinking back that paper of what, you know, what are the challenges of high rises? We don't want, you know, fragmented kind of community. We want this to be inclusive. So really, I was kind of, we did the whole value set. So sustainable, affordable, beautiful, engaging, built environment. So I wanted to just kind of say, hey, the overall conclusion of that paper, and it was a kind of cross-cultural examination of, I think it was like Shanghai, Seoul, and Ann Arbor. But the overall was that we need successful public activation for there to be, in the context of high rises. And so I wanted to just offer that perspective from that standpoint. I don't think that, again, the design review board doesn't necessarily have any teeth. I think, again, it's advisory in nature. Actually, Megan, that's actually one of the things I was going to ask of the DDA Capital Improvements Committee, how many people are on the design review board, and whether that, whether they give any feedback. I know like Tyler, for example, is on both, but I don't know if you guys talked to the design review board at all.
We didn't talk to the design review board, but we did talk about the design review board, and Tyler was there.
Oh, okay.
One of the things that was brought up there was that a lot of times the objection to, the building that was too tall is that not necessarily it's too tall, that it was not a great design.
Yeah.
And so then how do you integrate those or reward that good design, or look to get that good design? And rather than it, are there ways, there was a bit of discussion as, are there ways through requirements or guidelines to have that good design, or maybe that the design review board plays a heavier role, has a heavier touch in guaranteeing that these are the highest quality buildings, because just based on their height, they're possibly the most controversial.
Sure.
So that was the discussion we had at that committee.
Gotcha. And yeah, again, I certainly don't want to stray from this idea of simplicity, because developers these days do face a lot of headwinds, right? Higher interest rates, rising construction costs, subcontractors and labor, both material. There's just a lot of different pressures. So again, I don't want to stray from more regulatory oversight of like design, but again, at the same time, the trade-off has to be, if we're going to have skyscrapers, they better be sweet, right? They better look awesome. And I want to build healthier, stronger communities. And so that being a goal. And the thing that I was actually just looking through this book. So this has been what I've been reading lately. It's Missing Middle Housing by Daniel Perlock. I would actually highly recommend everyone. There's a lot of good case studies in here. Not necessarily quite as much high rise, rather than kind of that think mid-rise and the transitionary of single family. But a lot of what this talks about is, rather than trying to guide density, have form based. And so I thought that was interesting, and where this conversation is going. But overall, I hear a lot of people, I do believe I'm in support of kind of what I'm hearing. I really took what both Kirk Westfall and Will Leaf wrote to us, both people who I have a great deal of respect for. And I thought that, I think I'm going to read Will's quote here: "The single worst funding source for affordable housing is probably the taxation of new market rate housing, because that taxation will exacerbate housing shortage that makes housing unaffordable to begin with." So I felt that was a very interesting, again, he's a good thinker. And so that's overall, this is an interesting. I also wanted to just point out the perspective of the trade-off of high rises is they need to be done well with good public space provisions to promote healthier communities. But again, that's me talking to like developers out there. Please keep that in mind, right? Right now, we're just talking about obviously kind of like zoning, regulatory triggers essentially. So to get back to FAR, I hesitate to say, I don't necessarily want to have any kind of prescriptions, again, given kind of what I talked about earlier this meeting, but just wanted to talk more broadly about challenges that can come with unlimited height. I think I heard unlimited. I've been in a 108-story building in Korea, 50 and a 30. They can get pretty high, but affordability and sustainability being key, I do appreciate where this conversation is going. So that's it for me. Thanks.
Thank you. Other thoughts or feedback, Brett, that you were hoping to get? Yeah.
Thank you. You read my mind. I guess Megan and Alexis jump in if you have as well. Mostly you, Megan, because you have to synthesize all this. I'm hearing, I think I'm hearing more of the first option of sort of scenarios, eliminating premiums. So I think what I'm hearing is that's probably a good place for staff to start our work. One piece of that I just want to be clear though, is that over the last couple of years, the Planning Commission, me, petitioners have really struggled with sustainability elements. And I don't think that this is a bad thing, but I just want to be clear, by eliminating premiums, you are fully putting any energy efficiency standard or sustainability standards in the context of the building code and the energy code. And I don't think that's a terrible place for it to be, but I just want to name that that's a very different standard than some of the conversations that I've heard from our community, from you at the table on projects. And that approach removes the context of that conversation from development of new downtown. And so I want to name that I think in the context of this approach is what I think is the biggest deviation, perhaps, from some of the conversation that I've heard from you around projects at the table over the last couple of years. I'll continue to show that as we progress, but that is something that we didn't spend much time on discussing this evening, that I just want to be really upfront. That's really pulling away the premiums as a tool to incent something better than our current building code.
But the premium has not resulted in a lot of buildings that are more sustainable than the building code as of yet. So one question I would have, I guess, is if we wanted to consider a sustainability premium, what is a version of that premium that would be successful? And as is described in the memo, it's supposed to be difficult to obtain, or maybe there's a better way to say that. We're supposed to get a lot out of it, right? It's supposed to be really a benefit to the city. Yeah.
It has to be a worthwhile hurdle.
Right.
So it has to offer enough to the developer to take the leap, but then it also has to give the city enough of what it wants that it couldn't require. And I think Brett makes an excellent point in that the city doesn't, unlike many other states, cities here in Michigan, we don't control our energy code or a building code. And so if you,
and that's our lot.
So if you take premiums completely off the table, you're taking away an incentive tool you have to get that. Now, one of the things to think about is, it's not just, and the little bit I've attended your meetings, it's not just the downtown where you're looking for this energy efficiency. You're looking at throughout the city. So kind of a bigger policy question is, do you want to look to pursue that throughout the city and look at different ways to do that? Or do you still want to have this incentive here in this particular place in the city? And so that's the question. That's the question back to you. In terms of the housing affordability, I think based on your discussion, it feels that if the amount of housing units go up, that increases that housing affordability and it helps across the city, not only in the downtown, but across the city. But you haven't had the same conversation about sustainability and energy efficiency. So does that does just sheerly more units downtown help to meet those particular goals? And the answer could be no, but it's still, but it's not necessarily that we need to do this here and now with premiums in the downtown. I see I provoked some hands.
Commissioner Hammerschmidt.
I'll be quick. So I think for me, I mean, yeah, I would want to see something everywhere, not just downtown. So I would want to look at some sort of policy trigger where we could get that. And I think I've said this might be my third time saying this now. And I said it to the staff that's working on our how do we make development easier process, but like an incentive that's not just like an FAR incentive, but like a time incentive. Like Megan, you talked about some of that as other incentives, like getting pushed through for approvals, for permits, for everything. If you include these things, so your development can actually be built faster. Like that's the kind of stuff that I would rather focus on, rather than like you can get some extra FAR or extra higher, extra whatever if you do these things just in the downtown. Like I'd rather broaden it.
Commissioner White.
Yeah, I echo everything that Commissioner Hammerschmidt just said. Plus, we now have a climate millage, which we also didn't have when we put these sustainability premiums in. So like our affordable housing millage, we are already taxing to help with some of these things. And I don't think they should be in the way for us to build housing. And it doesn't look like the premiums were doing what they were intended to do. I think we would be having a very different conversation if those premiums have been utilized and we were now saying, oh, let's get rid of them. I think that would be a completely different conversation than the one that we're having right now. I think our primary goal, especially in the downtown, is they've lost somewhere between 3,000 and 6,000 employees because of work from home and COVID from the report that we received from the DDA. And housing is the next logical place to replace some of those lost bodies in the downtown. And the businesses need people to be in the downtown. And one of the ways that we can achieve that is with more density and more housing in the downtown. So I think if that is our primary goal, I think this is another step that we would take to try to achieve those ends. And like we know from various staff members, we can always change things in the future as we find ourselves changing things in the present.
Yeah, I'll just echo those same sentiments, and also just withholding density to encourage sustainability feels like we're shooting ourselves in the foot a bit, because we want density, and density is also more sustainable, contributes to lower carbon footprint. So if I wish there was a magic calculator that would tell me, you know, what's better in terms of carbon emissions, like catalyzing a bunch of market rate development downtown, or throttling development, but having that development be super green. You know, I don't think we have the benefit of being able to calculate that with any precision, but I think based on the research that we have seen and the lack of developments and the lack of, the way in which the premiums have not been utilized and have not been catalyzing super green or affordable developments downtown, I think we can say, well, this isn't working, and so let's posit something that we think could work based on other research that shows that just getting more denser housing built will actually be helpful in terms of affordability and sustainability. So I hear you, Brett, but I'm not sure that keeping the sustainability premium makes sense in any case.
I wasn't trying to convince you. I just wanted to name it. It's been a common topic. One other piece that I just want, sorry, I'm channeling if I were in Megan's role and I was trying to figure this out. Do you have any direction for, never mind. I'm going to stop. I was about to ask a dumb question.
Okay, well, maybe I'll say something I meant to say but forgot, which is that I would also support what Commissioner Hammerschmidt put on the table, which is some other kind of incentive, which is not tied to density. So I know that's outside the scope of this, maybe
And I think that should be citywide.
scope of this project, but some citywide incentive. And maybe one place is like, is it even legal or possible to have some program where we bump people to the front of the line in exchange for, yeah, geothermal or something?
Site plans don't have to ever go to anybody if the city so chooses.
Right. So we could look at that chart all over again, so.
Megan, anything else that is on your list as I keep trying to channel? You're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Speak firmly though, because you're a little far away from your mic.
I can't hear you.
Uh-oh.
You're really faint.
Just communicate through pantomime if you've got all the information you need.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
I can hear you.
Thank you.
I bumped a button.
Uh,
I really apologize.
no problem.
So what I'm hearing from the commission is that more leading towards that don't use in premiums at all. That let's take the FAR up. And on both levels, on housing affordability and then housing and then sustainability and energy efficiency due to changes in tax structure and due to changes and just that concentrating in the downtown makes it a more sustainable, affordable environment, that's where you're looking to go. However, there seems to be other threads in the code that could come in and incentivize things. But when we're building within this FAR box, there's a variety of factors at play that I think that we need to work with staff to make sure that we're drawing a box that every developer is capable of filling out that entire box. i.e. sometimes you might have 900 FAR, but you can't fit it in 100 feet. And to make sure those things aren't in there, but also then looking at maybe are there already incentives that can across the code, like the 30% height bonus that actually apply to this, that are incentivizing the things that you're looking at anyway. That's what I'm hearing, and is to look at crafting those amendments that go to that spot. Does that sum up what your discussion has been?
I'm not sure I totally understood the box, or
Okay.
I'm not sure I totally understood what, are you suggesting that we try to rethink the complicated convergence of the FAR limit with the character overlay and the fact that the FAR and the height limit sometimes are in conflict? Or are you saying we leave all of that as is?
I'm saying that we try and eliminate the conflicts and make it simpler to fill that box.
Got it. Yes, great.
And with the FAR going up. So I don't think that's your intent is to put the FAR up to a certain level and then find 5 developments in that somebody can't actually get to that, to that cap. Because of some other things that were already in the code. So we're just going to need to go through and look at those. And those are technical items that we can work with your staff to do.
Great. Commissioner Weich.
So I just want to clarify what I think I'm hearing, which is you heard the commission say we want to do away with premiums. So there's a full period there. And then we want to increase FAR, and there's a period there. And then you said, but in your code, there are other restrictions that will
May.
may prohibit your intent.
Yes.
And then there's a period there.
Yeah.
And so now you want to go back to staff and sort of workshop that. And that would come back to the commission as code amendments.
Yes.
Okay. So we may get rid of some additional things that would prohibit what we're trying to achieve by increasing the FAR.
You may eliminate some things or you may adjust some things.
But this is not, and I do not mean any dispersions when I say this. This is not a back door to putting premiums back in.
No.
Okay, great.
No, heard loud and clear. Yes.
I just don't want premiums by another name is
No.
effectively what I'm. It's like, oh,
Thank
it's not
you.
a premium. It's a
But
code
no.
restriction.
Yeah.
Mr. White's, just to oversimplify, Alexis, correct me if I'm wrong on this. When the premium, when we created the D1, D2 structure, it started strictly by an FAR regulation, like a much more pure form-based code. We didn't care how high that FAR was realized. The FAR was the sole limiter of what could happen there. And so it could happen, just like FAR does. It could be very blocky to a shorter, or it could be very narrow to a taller building. And then 10 o'clock in that process, height was added in addition to the FR limit. And I think what Megan's talking about is, if that's truly our goal, we need to sort of scenario plan, try to break those connections, because if that's the goal, we might have some limiters in our height, other requirements that even if we uncap this, we're going to be back here with frustration because you say I can do this, but I can't do this because of X, Y, or Z. And so it is by no means trying to add premiums. It is, if that's our intention to really open that up, we got to make sure we're truly doing that.
Any last comments, questions, concerns? All right. All right, thank you. So agenda item 4, communications to the Planning Commission. We did receive a couple of emails. Sounds like people have read those because they were referred to a couple of times during this conversation. They're in your packet. And now we'll move to our second opportunity for public comment. So if you would like to address the working session of the Planning Commission, you can use the raise hand button if you're joining via Zoom. If you're joining by phone, you can press *9 to indicate a desire to talk to us. You'll be identified by your name or the last 3 digits of your phone number. When it's your turn to speak, you'll be limited to 3 minutes per speaker.
Press *9 if you're listening by phone. Use the raise hand feature as Commissioner Abrams indicated. If you are logged in via Zoom, just talking slowly before I declare that no one is expressing a desire to address the Planning Commission.
All right. Item 6 is adjournment. We are adjourned. Thank you all. Have a good evening.
Bye.